if you look at calves that achieved passive transfer, got enough colostrum versus calves that didn't, there's a 5% difference in how many of those calves will survive to 60 days of age. There's been an emphasis to feed more milk to our calves, right? Maybe 20 years ago, like 4 liters was the norm. And now we see a lot of farms doing 6 to 8 liters. My research group and others have really put a lot of work into showing how that is going to impact first lactation milk yield. There's plenty of data that shows that if you can grow calves faster in the first 60 days, that they end up producing more milk for you in first lactation.
Welcome to the My Cow podcast, and my name is Shaun Balemi, and I've enjoyed over 20 years working with New Zealand farmers with dairy nutrition and cow health. Now, a special thank you goes out to Advanced Nutrition as our primary supporter. The focus of this podcast is to be a vehicle for delivering relevant insights to dairy farmers and ag professionals, all to help drive cow efficiency and farm business profitability, because stronger businesses are more sustainable and help to build stronger communities.
I'll welcome you on to the My Cow podcast. We've had the great pleasure of having Dr. Adam Geiger with us today. Hope I said that right.
You got it.
Yeah, in the US. So I've listened to Adam a couple of times actually. He's an amazing communicator and one of the 5 lactation physiologists.
Lactation physiologists. Okay. Yeah, there's there may be a few more than 5, but there's not many of us.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's say you're one of the leading experts in the world. Is that okay?
You can say whatever you'd like to say.
Okay. I reckon you should just take it.
All right.
Anyway, I've learned heaps from him over the years, and it's so it's been awesome, and you'll get heaps out of it today. So we're going to focus on maximizing the genetic potential in our cows. So we want to look at how we can raise our calves in a way where you maximize the amount of milk that they're going to produce over the season. So really looking forward to it. So before we get into that, I just want to thank FeedWorks for bringing Adam over, and you've worked for Zinpro. How long have you been with Zinpro?
So I was with Zinpro for 9 years, and so now I work in a little bit more of a consultancy role as an independent consultant, and still do work with Zinpro and FeedWorks here in Oceania. But it's been 9 years that I've been working in that capacity, focusing on lameness and the things we kind of talked about around udder health and management. But I've been doing the calf thing for a while. Maybe 15 years since I've been out of school. Yeah.
Excellent. So you did obviously an undergrad and then right through to a PhD.
Yeah. So I did my undergrad at Wisconsin, just general dairy. And then I did a master's in the deep south in the States, Mississippi. So got to really experience the humidity and hot temperatures, and that was more nutritional focused. So that was ruminant nutrition masters, and then yes, with the PhD, we went into understanding more about how the udder functions and works. There was still a nutritional component to that, but the big focus was understanding how we're feeding young animals and how that is going to help improve udder development in early life to ultimately help these animals reach their lifetime productivity goals.
Cool.
Yeah.
So it's just important in America as it is in New Zealand?
It is important everywhere.
Well, more milk means more money, right?
That's right. That's right. And for minimal investment too, right?
Yeah, feed conversion efficiency. So, more feed into more milk is,
always a good thing.
Yeah, I like it. Man, it's very, very cool. And you have family back home?
I do. I've got, so my wife and kids, we're in Georgia in the U.S. And so my wife, Abby, is at home. I doubt she'll see this, but if she does, love you. Hope you're doing well. And I'll be home in a week and a half. And then I have a son and a daughter, 11 and 8.
Yeah, nice.
So thank you for asking.
Cool. No, that's it's a big part of how we do agriculture in New Zealand. It's very family based.
I like that.
Awesome. Well, let's get stuck into it. So you've been to New Zealand, what, 5, 6 times?
Yeah,
a few times now, and you've been on a lot of farms. So you have a pretty good idea of how we do farming and how the pastoral based system works. If you're looking at maximizing the milk production potential or genetic potential in our cows, what would be the top 5 things that you'd be going after? A bit of a bird's eye view before we dig into the detail.
Yeah, when you start to talk about that extends more outside of just calf rearing, right? But the things I see as opportunities here in New Zealand really aren't unique to New Zealand, right? A lot of the things that we encounter globally are the same issues kind of over and over again. So I'm going to make sure that I'm going to number it down here so I make sure I don't go past 5, right? But
if you do, I won't judge. Totally fine.
Let's try to start with the young animal and work our way older, right? I think one opportunity globally, but it's also very prevalent here in New Zealand, is really putting an emphasis on colostrum management, right? I think most folks that work in the calf and heifer space would agree that 30 minutes to 1 hour you spend with each calf after she's born, that's the single most important time you can invest into her that's going to have maximum return on investment later. If we get colostrum into these babies in appropriate amounts and in a timely fashion, we're going to improve growth rates, we're going to reduce vet bills, we're going to reduce the number of issues that we're having around with the other stressors, and that is going to lead to more milk in first lactation. That's been shown. And so I guess kind of number one would be colostrum management, but if I could dive in more specifically, I think it's looking at how we control bacterial load and cleanliness with our colostrum and our feeding equipment. One thing that I've noticed in New Zealand, which is just as prevalent everywhere else in the world, but can be a bigger risk in pasture rearing systems, is how well we clean our calf kitchens after we're done, because they are out in the elements a bit more than maybe things in a confinement system. So when I've spent time testing feeding equipment here with my little, I wish I had it with me, but my little bacteria meter, I could test your phone, but
do that.
we find pretty high levels of contamination. And one of the things that gets brought up to me again and again by a lot of producers here is, these calves, they're born, we get colostrum into them, but then something's just not right from like day 5 to 7, right? We're having issues with loose fecal consistency, scouring, and a lot of that just comes back to bacterial contamination.
Right. So it's not necessarily they haven't got enough colostrum or they haven't got it quick enough.
Yeah.
It's actually that they're getting just way too big a load of bugs
with
it.
Yeah, and the good stuff, the antibodies in the colostrum, its whole goal is to kill bacteria. So if it finds it in the gut, it'll take care of it there, and then the calf can't absorb it and can't have it for its general immune protection.
It actually uses up a lot of the power of fighting the microbes before it even gets into the calf to do what it needs to do.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's backtrack a little bit there. So timing is pretty key. Like it is tricky in New Zealand. We might have 50 cows calve in one day.
Mm-hmm.
And so to catch all of those calves and get colostrum into them within 2 hours is a bit of a job.
Yeah.
So to do that, we obviously, it's going to take a lot more labor and a lot more like intentional management changes. Yeah. How much benefit is there to actually getting colostrum into a calf within 2 hours of being born?
Yeah. So that's an excellent point. And we run into it in North America with our larger farms, right? Especially when we're dealing with calves born at night, right? We don't always have night labor there, and that's not just an issue in North America, but we don't always have night labor available. So these calves could be born at 10 p.m. and then they're not getting fed till maybe 5 or 6 in the morning, right? So it's the same sort of thing. There's a number of things that we can do to prioritize this. Certainly, there's that labor component to it as well. But when we're dealing with potential delays in feeding, which are detrimental because at about 4 hours of age, the calf has lost about 20 to 30% of its ability to absorb the antibodies out of colostrum. Additionally, there's a mother component to this too. By the time she's about 6 hours fresh, colostrum quality is going to decrease by about 20%, right? So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? So in that situation, number one, making sure we're testing colostrum and being positive that what we're feeding is high quality. I'm talking like 23, 24, 25 on the brick scale or above is key. There's feeding delays. The higher the quality, the better.
Right. So if you're a farmer listening to this and they were like, yeah, that's great, it doesn't smell or it looks okay. Yeah. How do you, like you're talking 23, 24, how do we do that?
There's a number of ways to look at it, but by far the most common way to do it is the Brix refractometer. Yes. It's funny, right? I grew up on a dairy, right? So I think of what we did versus what I recommend now. Mm-hmm. I vividly remember yellow, it's good. It's got to be good, right? But now all the recent studies show that color doesn't matter, right? And there's breed differences that can lead to color changes as well. So that's why we use a refractometer. There's two types. They require just about a drop or two from a syringe of colostrum on them. And there's the optical where you look through it, a little more open. What you see as a 23, I might see as a 24.
Yeah, interpretation.
Yep. But there's the digital where you can just put a drop on it, right? Those things can be anywhere from maybe 50 US dollars. So, 70 New Zealand to maybe 150 New Zealand or more. I mean, there's some Cadillac versions, but all you got to do is save one or two calves and it pays for itself. And the reason this becomes so critical is right out of the gate, when you talk about passive transfer, if you look at calves that achieved passive transfer, got enough colostrum versus calves that didn't, there's a 5% difference in how many of those calves will survive to 60 days of age. So that $100, $200 piece of equipment can save you 5% of your calves. That's a pretty good ROI.
Yeah, and that's negating the difference in growth rates and different things as well,
Yep.
I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. We've had a few days of conference, so I have learned some of the stuff as well. So I should know it pretty well. But you're talking a lot about drying, like the importance of actually drying equipment.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to learn about cleaning, right? But the single greatest thing we can do for the cleaning process is make sure our equipment gets dry after we clean it, right? Bacteria want it wet. The only way you can break the growth cycle is to let things get dry, right? A lot of times people think, we're trying to save calves and decrease mortality. We got to invest in vaccine protocols or better quality feeds. No, I mean, I hang 2x4s up in mixing sheds and pound railroad nails into them, and we hang bottles and nipples, and that's decreased mortality more than a lot of other things we do. So if we can get things dry, that is going to have significant impacts on our ability to reduce issues with calf health.
Yeah, wow. So cleaning out the cafeteria, unscrewing the nipples, actually letting them dry.
Yeah, maybe propping it up so it can drain appropriately. Absolutely. Yep. Little things that make a big difference.
Yeah. And you talked a bit about chlorine hydroxide, is it?
Chlorine dioxide, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so that could be a little bit of a cheat's way because it's a bit of a disinfectant.
Yeah, so, typically when we go through the cleaning cycle, right, we're rinsing it, we're using a soap or a detergent. Maybe in really dirty conditions, we're using an acid wash system, with that last step ultimately being the drying step. But one really good maybe sometimes optional step we can include is a disinfectant step. And I work a lot with different disinfectants in the US. Maybe we're using like an iodine or a peroxide or a chlorine-based solution. But chlorine dioxide is the best option, I think, out there because number one, it kills crypto. Not many things kill crypto. And number two, it's extremely safe, right? It's what humans use to clean their water they might get in streams while they're camping. Right. The only drawback of chlorine dioxide is the shelf life isn't great. So when you do mix it, try to mix it in a smaller batch, or once you have it mixed in, when you're done using it, make sure you keep it in the dark or maybe in the refrigerator. But that's a great, especially for these calf kitchens that can be out in some pretty brutal elements at times. After you get done rinsing things out and scrubbing things down, that stuff's so safe. Literally right before you put milk in it for the next feeding, you can give it a quick spray.
Yep.
You're ready to go.
It's done. Yeah, easy as that. So once you wash it through, because it lasts about 30 minutes, isn't it? Then it gases off. Is that why it doesn't have a great shelf life?
These different cleaning agents and disinfectants only have a certain amount of contact time that they're effective. So the example I used there was 30, but chlorine dioxide actually is going to kill things relatively quickly. So you really only need to put it on about 5 minutes before you feed. And you're good to go. But the issue is when you just throw it into something, right, and then let it wait till the next feeding, that active contact time where the agent is effective, you're going to pass that eventually. Yes. And now instead you just have a wet environment for the bacteria to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Through the calving period, our guys are working hard. Like they're doing 12 to 14-hour days. And so we need something really simple. They can go and do a chlorine wash, maybe once a week, do an acid wash. Make sure everything's off and dry each day, and just simple processes.
Yep.
But I love how you go in and you take your meter and you actually do bacterial counts. I think it's really clever. I think there's a great space for doing bacterial counts and actually setting targets for the guys there.
Oh, absolutely. And you can't argue with the number, right? My definition of dirty and your definition of dirty might be different, but the machine, it's only got one objective.
So let's talk a little bit more about feeding the calf, and you've talked about a few different systems, but what would you say is best practice around getting milk volume into the calf, and how we sort of manage either ad lib feed or restrictive feed, and what have we sort of learned around the science in that space?
That's a big question. So okay, well, let's start with milk, right? I think in general, globally, and New Zealand is definitely falls in this camp in terms of their mindset too. There's been an emphasis to feed more milk to our calves, right? Maybe 20 years ago, like 4 liters was the norm, right? And now we see a lot of farms doing 6 to 8 liters. My research group and others have really put a lot of work into showing how that is going to impact first lactation milk yield. There's plenty of data that shows that if you can grow calves faster in the first 60 days, that they end up producing more milk for you in first lactation. I've seen some numbers around 400 kgs of energy-corrected milk. I've seen some numbers up over 2,000 kgs of energy-corrected milk, right? So every farm is different, but I'm a pretty big fan of the higher feeding rates, which would lend itself to kind of that 8 liters of milk or milk replacer or more a day, right?
Which is a reasonable amount.
Yeah,
given our calves are a little bit smaller, you'd still be pushing to that sort of 8 liters.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've shared with you a personal story. I'll share it with the group here too. I mean, when I was at Virginia Tech, we were doing research on Jersey calves, and I had a 3-week-old Jersey calf break my single day milk drinking record. Do you remember what that number is?
I know it was in the 20s.
20,
it was huge.
27 liters.
Yeah. Which we had a few vets in the room, and they were like, nah, there's no way.
100%, right? I doubt it drank anything the next day, and it probably didn't eat any starter that day, but on that day, it was my champion, right?
Wow.
So the capacity for calves to drink milk is quite high, right? And one of the benefits of that is obviously the mammary aspect to produce more milk later on. We tend to see less health events with those calves as well. And it's just from a welfare perspective, those animals look a lot nicer. They're fuller. They've got more bloom and capacity to them. But then you've created a bigger calf. So when you do eventually start the weaning process, because they're bigger and have higher needs, feed needs, we see that drive for solid feed intake become that much greater. And that's the one thing we've got to remember with these higher feeding rates is the weaning process, and our practices around weaning become that much more important. We got to make sure to not do this thing too quickly, right? We're probably talking a minimum 7, but up to a 10 or 14 day weaning process when we're feeding some of these higher feeding rates to make sure that these calves, their rumens, get appropriately acclimated to life on solid feed after the milk goes away.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, so it's a hustle because basically if you do the job better earlier on, you do make sure that you nail that transition.
Yeah.
So tell us more about that weaning process then, because 7 to 14 days, that's a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah.
I still know farms that will just turn the milk off and away they go.
Well, so the first thing we want to do is when we're talking about solid feed and water, the best weaning starts at day 1 by having them introduced to solid feed and water and familiar with it from as early as possible.
Sure.
Right. And what we have to remember is the ratio or the relationship of water to calf feed is 4 to 1. For every 1 kg you want her to consume of feed, she's going to drink 4 liters of water. Right. So I typically want to see calves consuming at least 1.5 kgs, preferably 2 kgs of solid feed per day for 2 or 3 days, 4 days before the milk completely goes away. So that means she's got to be drinking 6 to 8 liters of water a day as well, right? And sometimes we lose sight of that. But the goal is understanding that solid feed intake is what drives rumen development and ultimately gets the calf ready to be weaned. If we don't have that, we can't be successful. And so that's why I like to make sure that we're kind of taking things slow, because there's a lot of work out there that shows when you pull all that feed away at once, you've created a lot of stress. Maybe you've worked really hard feeding 8, 10 liters a day up to that point, got great growth. That mammary gland, that udder is ready to produce a lot of milk. Things can go backwards. We got to be careful of that, right?
Sure. So let's I got a whole host of questions out of that, and that's fantastic. But I remember the number sort of that basically the milk secretory cell, what I call the milk secretory cells, because I just find that so much easier than
Yeah.
talking about parenchyma
Yeah,
and
yeah,
everything
yeah,
else.
yeah,
But, so forgive my simplicity, but basically that tissue. Can you explain how that's all happening in the calf, like how the milk secretory cells are developing,
yeah,
and why that early nutrition is so important for the lifetime production of the cow?
yeah, yeah. It's I'm clearly biased, but I think it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, but you got good data to back it up. So it doesn't matter.
So the mammary gland or the udder, completely unique from any other organ in the body, right? Calf's born with a brain, born with lungs, born with a stomach, born with intestines, not really born with an udder. Okay, you've got the teat, you can see the tissue around the teat, but essentially you just have a very small amount of milk producing cells right above the teat, almost like the tip of a pen, and that's it, right? So what makes the mammary gland or the udder unique is 99.9% of all of its growth happens after the calf is born, okay? So that means the decision we make after she's born are going to influence how that organ grows. And so what we've learned over the last few, I'd say 10 years or so, is that the mammary gland is going to grow 60 times in size in the first 75 days of life.
Wow.
So the calf's going to double, maybe triple body weight. And in that same time, the mammary gland grows 60 times, right? So we've learned that first 60 to 90 days is the single most active period of udder development. We've also learned that is the only time in the life of the animal when the udder or the mammary gland and its development respond positively to more nutrient intake and more body growth.
Yeah, wow. So you're almost adapting the calf to a life of high production, because it's almost
That's a great way to put it. I like that.
Well, it's almost, you could say, like if a calf was born in nature and in a rich environment where it could, I don't know, have 2 or 3 calves suckling, then that makes sense, because then that calf would grow a lot more milk secretory tissue.
Mhm.
But if it lives in a very harsh environment, yeah,
Right.
I never even, sorry, I'm just geeking out now
Yeah.
on science, but I just think it's really fascinating. So we have so much control over how much that future calf is actually going to
Yeah.
produce just by the way we feed it. And basically we're telling her milk secretory cells that she's in a great environment and she can just go for it.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. But the reverse to that is we can also do damage,
Yes.
right? Just sticking that calf with a needle for respiratory disease, regardless of how bad that disease is, we're going to drop at least 500 liters of fluid milk off that first lactation.
Wow.
Right. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. And whatever happens in first lactation actually affects all the subsequent lactations after that.
Exactly. Because my opinion and what we've talked about here is one of the, if not the most important period of mammary growth is those first 60 to 90 days. Number 2 is that transition period of that first lactation, right? Because her mammary gland, get through those first 60 to 90 days, it's going to continue growing. She's going to get pregnant, and then she's going to get ready to calve. But when she gets to that last 2 weeks before her first calving, all of her hormones and everything in her body starts going crazy, right? Getting ready for her to give birth. And then after she gives birth, everything goes crazy because now she's making milk. So that's when everything ramps back up, right? But if we have anything that's compromised at that first calving event, we have now severely limited her lifetime potential going forward, because that first calving event sets the baseline of milk production and the number of milk producing cells that she'll subsequently build on in each following lactation.
Interesting. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like there's almost 2 really critical phases. There's this early calf development phase where it's almost, and I love your analogy, and sorry I'm stealing it, but it's like the tree branches growing out,
Yeah.
which is like the branches inside the udder that are going to carry the
milk ducts. Yeah.
Yeah, the milk ducts. But then the leaves still need to develop, which are the actual milk secretory cells, and that's later on in the calf development, isn't it?
Yep.
So how we actually feed energy and how we balance the nutrition for the calf after she's weaned is quite critical as well, isn't it?
Yeah, there's really 4 nutrients that I mean, I'm simplifying it, right? And there's other periods of of mammary growth when we can really mess things up too, or really do good. But in an oversimplified way, there's kind of 4 nutrients that I really look at, right? The first is just simply energy and protein, right? We've got to make sure that we're growing this animal. We got to provide enough protein in the right ratio with energy to promote lean tissue growth and to be able to put down more milk ducts and milk producing cells, right? Another big one is, you probably know what I'm going to say, manganese. Manganese is my favorite mineral, but the reason that one's so important is mammary growth is nutritionally driven, but if you look at what's inside the animal, it's also really driven by hormones from the ovaries, estrogen, progesterone, right? Manganese is required to convert cholesterol to both estrogen and progesterone, right? So if we don't have enough manganese, we don't have those levels of sex hormones that we need to do that. The issue is a lot of times we do have enough manganese, but manganese is antagonized by iron in the water, right? So we may think we're doing things right, but then we do a water analysis and find there's something capturing our manganese and preventing it.
In New Zealand, we have a lot of manganese, but its bioavailability is very low, isn't it?
That's the other one that we got to remember, is that we pretty much can discount any manganese in the grass because its availability is between 0.1 and 0.4%.
Right.
And the thing I always recommend is when you're starting to evaluate these things, test your water first.
Yes.
Right. At least get an answer to that, because that can be kind of a silent killer for us. And if we can at least rule it in or out, understanding that the seasonality, we got rain today, right, can impact the height of your water table and the concentration of these different minerals. I like to see it tested, maybe in spring and fall.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it always guts me when I see farmers, they do the rearing phase really well. So they grow their calves really well, they get great calf rearers in, and then they wean them, and then they get sent off to runoff, which is fine. But sometimes, there isn't any mineral fortification out there. They do some injections and boluses maybe haphazardly, but, sometimes just getting a free choice mineral like with calcium, magnesium, maybe phosphorus and your manganese, copper, zinc is another big one. Getting that into the animal can make quite a significant difference in terms of her success in first, second, third lactation.
Absolutely. The fourth one for mammary development, the nutrient that I look at is zinc, as you just mentioned, right? Because zinc is really important for that mammary, those cells to be able to spread. But zinc is also so super important for the immune system, right? So if we just want to be able to help these animals stay healthy, maintain proper lung function, promote feed efficiency and just general health overall, providing a basic, trace mineral supplement can really have a lot of key benefits to helping these animals. It's no different anywhere else, right? We've got what I call the two black boxes of heifer nutrition, right? Or of calf nutrition, right? Hey, you're weaned. See you again when we need to breed you.
Yeah.
Hey, you're pregnant. See you again when it's time to calve, right?
I love the fact that's an international.
Yes,
it's not just a New Zealand thing.
It is not just a New Zealand thing. I promise you that. But what I can tell you is that we are starting to learn more about what the requirements are for these animals. And Zinpro's done a lot of work too, showing that when you can provide organic trace minerals to these animals and get in and focus on their requirements, that there's a lot of benefits to be gained for these heifers. And a lot of that shows itself in terms of improved growth rates and improved reproductive efficiency.
Yeah, awesome. All very, very important points. Right?
Yes.
Let's take another little step back, and we keep pushing forward, and then we go back. Like, I often get asked, what's the best calf meal? How do we get more calf meal into our calves, and how do we know that it is the right meal? And because it is quite a science, and I didn't talk about this at the start, but you do nutrition for 750,000 calves in the US, so you probably know a few things about formulating a calf meal.
Yeah, it's our knowledge base has grown pretty substantially in the last 5 to 10 years. I come from the States, and we love starch, right? Maybe to a fault.
We won't judge you though.
Yeah, we see a lot of high starch calf starters that are 40% or more in terms of starch, right?
Oh.
And so, what we're trying to do, we're trying to balance starch, because starch is obviously very important for rumen development, right? Starch and grain is going to be fermented into butyrate and propionate, the VFAs that cause the papillae to develop, super important, right? We don't get those from forages, right?
Okay. So scratch factor often was talked about back in the day. And so we will say, oh, have free choice hay available, and the calf will, it will scratch the rumen wall and it will develop those papillae. That's science has basically disproved that, and it said that you need good quality energy or starch, and potentially a little bit of grass, but not too much, as we talked about.
Yeah, the grass is really going to be, it can help us develop some of that musculature around the rumen, but not the papillae. Right. So that's why we try to balance things out, right? I'm looking for somewhere around 33% starch, which I find is adequate to promote rumen development without causing acidosis. But I am focusing on fiber, right? We want to have NDF maybe around 23% and ADF maybe around 11 to 13%, and then obviously there's going to be protein 18 to 22% somewhere in there depending upon your objectives. But fiber can be our friend and it can be our enemy, right? Because fiber is going to be really important for saliva production, chewing behavior, buffering of the gut, things like that. But fiber is also our limiter of intake, right? So if we do too high of a fiber diet, they won't be able to eat as much. And it's going to be hard for us to get enough starch into them in terms of like total grams of starch to achieve our objectives.
Right. So they're going after the free choice hay and they're not eating the meal.
Right. And that's why we've really focused. Calves have a fiber requirement. Absolutely. Right. But we try to mix that in with the calf starter to almost create like a pseudo TMR, because we want everybody to be the same. Because to your point, and especially if starch is maybe a little bit on the high side or super rapidly digestible, they're going to hammer away on that starter. Oh, now I've got a little bit of acidosis. My rumen pH dropped. That didn't feel so good. Then they're going to go hammer away on the hay. Well, now I'm full because the fiber limited my intake, but now my stomach feels better. So now I'm going to go back to this.
Yeah.
And it's just boom, boom. And it really decreases the efficiency of the whole system.
Yeah, sure. No, it makes sense. Yeah, we showed an amazing picture, and I'll try and find it to put it up here. But basically, you had a milk-fed calf with a rumen, like milk only, and it was smooth as smooth. And then in the middle, you had a calf-fed milk and calf starter, calf meal, and that was beautiful papillae, nice and dark. And then the third one was almost looked like a milk-fed calf, but it was a calf-fed milk and hay only.
Yep.
Quite incredible.
Yeah.
It was smooth as smooth.
Yep. That was some work done at Penn State, in some 6 to 8 week old calves. And that's because all of that forage, it's not fermented like into propionate and butyrate like our cereal grains. It's more focused into being turned into acetate.
Yeah, makes sense. So 33% starch, 22 roughly % protein. You can. There's a little bit of leeway there, and you can go higher protein at the start and slightly lower as a more finisher meal if you want to. And then you're talking 16%. ADF, is it?
About 13. 11 to 13, yeah.
Okay, 11 to 13. And the ADF is acid detergent fiber.
Yep.
So that's a fiber fraction that is non-digested.
Yep.
But that's important because, obviously it's providing that fiber and slows down passage rate?
Slows down passage rate, a bit of that chew factor, but really it slows that passage rate to help with digestion within the rumen. Also it'll help increase capacity of that rumen a little bit as well. So you can kind of tell when we up the ADF, you can just see a bit more bloom and capacity. These calves are not as kind of sucked in, So really important for that. And then the NDF obviously is going to be digestible. It's going to provide nutritive factors, nutrition to the calf, encourage chewing, encourage eventually rumination, things like that.
Excellent. And NDF was 24?
23. Yeah.
23?
23.
Yeah. And do you have, sorry, this is me just being a little bit more detailed now, but if I got an analysis on the NDF digestibility, do you have a preference for what that should be? Should it be sort of a 12 to 24 hour digestibility, or are you happy with a longer sort of 48-hour NDF digestibility?
Yeah, I usually do like a 24 or 48. I used to send in a lot more samples than I do now, right? But really just looking at the digestibility of that fiber, for example, I was using as my fiber source, calves love cottonseed hulls. I was using a lot of cottonseed hulls and sending in samples to get digestibility analysis done on them. Very happy with it, but it got so expensive. So then I had to start putting in whole cottonseed. Brings in a lot of oil, but also has the digestibility is pretty comparable to cottonseed hulls. And those weren't as easy to find anymore. And then all of a sudden, everybody had access to peanut hulls. So then everybody wanted me to use peanut hulls and peanut trash, and that stuff wasn't quite so digestible. So we were doing some of that as well, some of those analysis. But here lately, I've luckily been able to get more consistent supply of the feedstuffs I'm using.
It's harder. You think, man, this is a good feed, even though if it costs more, just spend the money. But farmers are farmers. If they can find something cheaper, they'll go for it.
And in the U.S., it's regional too.
Yeah,
the Southeast has got way more cottonseed than the West.
Yeah, so you can really only get what you can get.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That makes sense. And we do have a bit of that here. And to be fair, farmers will spend money on good quality with their calves for sure, which I totally agree with. We use a bit of soya hulls, and soybean meal in our calf meals. Why have you had much experience with soya hulls, and why do they work so well in calves? Calf meal starter.
I use a lot of soy hulls in pellets. So typically I'll make a pellet and then combine it with a fiber and starch source. I use soybean meal as a protein source as well, canola meal. A lot of those pellets also have ground corn, maybe some barley in it, and some wheat midds. Soy hulls are great, and calves like them. They're digestible, and they help make a really good pellet. Yeah. So that's one thing I really like about it.
Pellet, but that palatability, or the calves actually liking the meal is a big part of the way. Obviously, get it into them.
Yep, palatability is key.
So we talked a little bit about the nutritional profile of a starter meal, but what about the mineral side and even amino acids and vitamins and different things? What should we be looking for in a good meal in that regard?
Yeah, so I think one of the most common questions I get is form. Right? I've got a lot of folks that use a complete pellet. I've got a lot of folks that use more of a texturized, so that might be a pelleted, a partial pellet, mixed with a fiber and a starch source that I alluded to. The main thing in terms of form is we don't want too many fine particles, right? So making sure we have good pellet quality. If we're having processed corn, making sure that it's screened so that there's not too many fine particles, because those are going to be very rapidly fermented.
You don't want it too fine.
Yes, because it'll be too rapidly fermented, and the calves don't like that. They'll sort it. Right. We can get around some of that by adding some molasses, potentially. I always try to keep my molasses less than 5%. If I can keep it closer to 2 to 3%, I'm happier. But there's some places of the world I do work where I can't use molasses because, number one, it's too cold constantly, and then your calf starter turns into a block of ice. Or number two, it's too hot and too dry, and it essentially goes rancid.
Yeah,
right.
So you can only use a certain amount, 2 to 5%. But
that's kind of the sweet spot. So I actually was just doing a diet last night, and I finally increased it from 4 to 4.5%. Just because we were having some issues with a little bit of fine particles at the mill from the flake corn.
And them sorting in the bins. So you clean out the bins, and there's a whole lot of fine sitting in the bottom, which takes your starch probably from 33 down to, I don't know, 28 or whatever.
Exactly. And I always take 2 samples when I send in those for analysis, one from kind of each side, and see how close they are, and we're much tighter now.
One question I have, a personal one, but I get it from farmers all the time, is if we feed more milk, they eat less meal, and so we want to try and restrict the milk so they get into the meal more. Can you unpack that? Obviously, feeding lots of milk earlier on, nailing that first 6 weeks, growing a bigger calf, and how that sort of plays into the whole meal intake.
Yeah, it's 100% true, right? The more, at least while they're still on the milk, the more milk you feed, the less starter they'll eat, right? And especially if it's whole milk or milk from the farm, because then it's got even more fat in it, right? So that'll
fills them up.
Yep. So that'll suppress intake even more. That comes back to that weaning process and how important it is for us to do that delicately and not abruptly. But then again, I think when we're feeding more milk, we end up growing a bigger calf. So when we start to pull that milk away, we're going to see that interest kind of increase a lot quicker. So yeah, for me, it's about nailing those first 60 days. But then if you'll recall, that impact on mammary and udder development happens from day 0 to day 90. So if you wean at 60, you still got 30 days where you can positively influence it or negatively influence it by getting the weaning process, not getting them onto solid feed correctly, right? So I just think it requires a bit more TLC, a bit more tender love and care. And one thing that I've been doing a lot on my farms is to see how well we're doing with that process, we'll actually take fecal samples from these calves before and after weaning and look at fecal starch while they're still on the solid feed, obviously, because that will tell us how well the rumen has acclimated once the milk went away to digesting the grain that we're offering them, right?
Right, yes.
For
How much is actually escaping through the calf
Yeah,
and not being
yeah.
utilized?
So a calf before weaning is going to have fecal starches around 1 or 2%, maybe up to 3. Typically, after the milk goes away and they're still on grain, that number will maybe increase to 4 or 5%. That's pretty normal. I've seen situations where we don't get it right. I've seen that number go up over 10%. And then we know that, hey, this rumen was not prepared for life after milk.
Yeah, incredible. So in that early phase then, when the calves have come in, they're a couple of weeks old and we're really starting to ramp that milk up, they might be getting sort of 6 or 8 liters. How do we really encourage increased meal intakes? Because that's obviously really important for rumen development, which is going to be pretty critical in the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's much easier in group house calves because they kind of learn from each other. I think there's that natural curiosity of a calf that they typically tend to start exploring things like that around 2 to 3 weeks of age, and they'll start to eat it in negligible amounts. I think it's important that we're consistently providing fresh feed, right? Not letting that feed sit there and kind of go bad. So emptying out those buckets regularly, replacing it on a daily basis if we can, or at least adding to it so that they can still smell it and get fresh feed.
So have small amounts out, but regularly turn it over, even if you've got to waste a little bit.
Yep.
Keep it fresh.
And here's 2 weird ones for you so this will be new for you because we haven't talked about this yet. Getting the feed as close to the calf as you can. So one way we do that is these young calves might be reluctant to put their heads deep down in buckets. So I don't know what you call them here, but in the States we call them tortilla pans because we have
feeding troughs.
Well, yeah, they're just short little tortilla pans you can put in the bucket to raise the calf starter up about that much. We find that those calves start consuming quite a bit. The other thing that we find that really helps is, so maybe we fed milk in the morning and we're going to come top off the water later. Just shaking that bucket and making noise with it, establishing that routine, typically those calves get up and come and take a couple nibbles. Yeah, wow. So there's zero data behind that, but I can just tell from anecdotal experience, we can get a couple 100 extra grams in some instances in terms of feed consumed.
Just by sparking the interest.
Yeah, just little behavioral things.
That's super. I like it. We'll often have troughs sort of hung over the gate or the rails and calf sheds, and we try and probably have it up. It's kind of head height-ish. Yeah. So they almost walk past and they can smell it.
But it's also lifting it up within that too, so they don't have to stick their head way down into it,
Yes. Yeah, because it's obviously an intimidating sort of thing. Yeah. Clever. No, I like it. And so what about obviously you might have 2 feeding times a day and you're really trying to ramp up your meal and put into the calves. Would you try and feed them meal when you're feeding them at a similar time you're feeding them milk? Or when you normally would feed milk, it maybe drop to 1 feed a day, or
so when you're feeding twice a day, I think what's most important is that you establish a routine, because they do crave a routine, right? So if you come through do milk, then come through do water, and then come through do starter, for your morning feeding, for example, just continue to do that, right? Be consistent. So they kind of always, I like doing it right around feeding time because they're typically already up. Exploring, they're hoping you're going to give them more milk typically, but then it's solid feed and they might explore it. But then what you alluded to next is if you're going to pull away one of those feedings for the weaning process, I do like that you pull away the feeding that coincides with when you feed starter, right? Because then they're coming and expecting milk and they're not getting it, but they're getting solid feed. They usually eat it out of anger, but they're at least eating it.
They're reluctant.
They're mad, but they'll do it.
I like it. Sometimes lessons are hard learned.
That's right. Yep.
So really, we're targeting really good milk intake. That's a big part of it. Obviously, we want to balance that nutritionally. If we're feeding whole milk, which you talked about before, higher fat content is going to fill those carbs up. So sometimes a replacer potentially could, if the price is similar, it could be worth going more towards a replacer rather than a whole milk.
Or if you've got a high protein milk replacer or milk additive, you can add that into the whole milk just to try to boost that protein up, right?
Yes, and
Because
dilute the fat down.
yep, dilute the fat down a little bit, right?
Clever.
Because when we talk about protein to energy, really any ratio over 1 is going to promote more of this growth as opposed to this, right? So whole milk is naturally inversed, right? It's, if you dried it down and pretended it was a milk replacer, it would be maybe like a 27 protein, 33 fat, right? So if you could add like a 28-20 or 26-20 to it, you could balance out the solids a little bit and get more groceries into them, but also inflate that ratio.
Yeah, so go from like slabby-sided carbs to nice muscular.
Now it is hard to make calf fat. It's very hard. But when that ratio is inverted, the desire to eat solid feed's not there.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so that's the key point.
Yep.
Drive the protein, which actually drives solid feed intake.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
Clever. So that's actually a really, really key point. Now, another thing, and I did have another thought, so I'll come back to that. But water quality and intake is really critical with carbs, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it often gets a little bit, and I'm guilty of this as well. You put it in the back of your mind because you think, well, they're drinking 8 liters of milk or whatever it might be, and you know, you don't have to worry so much. But tell us a bit about water quality and also how important it is to test water.
Yeah, water quality is huge in calves, and they do not get enough water from the milk. You know, that's when I said that 4 liters per 1 kg, that is not including the milk, right? Because the milk, that's a separate, that's being used in a separate way for the calf. Sure, it provides some hydration, but it's not the same as water, right?
It's a decent amount of water, eh?
Yeah, I mean,
4
it's
kilos per kilo of milk.
yeah, that's a lot of water, right?
Yeah.
And you know, when we talk about water, there's typically a number of different issues we can have. The first issue is that we can have impacts on feed intake, which is, you know, if we don't have water that's the right quality. But when we start talking about water quality, we tend to think of the 2 main effects. Number one, if there's some crazy stuff going on in the water, they're just not going to drink it, right? So there's certain palatability concerns. And the other thing is, if there's issues in water, typically it's minerals or bacteria. Those things are going to bind up the minerals in their feed and the minerals and the nutrients in their milk and make them unavailable to the animal. So it's important that we always test our water so we at least know what's there. We can maybe make some dietary decisions, etc., based off that. But I'll tell you, the most common one we run into globally, New Zealand included, and being no exception, is iron.
Yeah.
Right.
And tying up zinc, tying up manganese.
Everything.
Yeah.
And iron is a really big driver of palatability, right? If it's got a lot of iron in it, the calves just aren't going to drink it.
Right, and if they don't want to drink, they're not as likely to eat the meal.
Yep. And then they're going to have issues with weaning.
Yeah, it's a whole lot of problems. That actually leads me on to the whole mineral side of things with the milk as well, or whole milk in particular. I was actually quite amazed, and I don't have all the numbers, but I saw a graphic that you showed us. Whole milk has a lot less trace mineral content in it than what the calf actually requires.
Yeah. So people don't realize that when it comes to promoting body growth, we get a lot of growth with whole milk because they are consuming a lot of protein and energy, but it's maybe not as efficient as it could be. And certainly health can also be compromised at times because it's very deficient in a number of trace minerals and vitamins that the calf needs to support optimal immune function, right? So whole milk, if that's what you're feeding, provides 0% essentially of the calf's daily manganese requirement, the daily iron requirement, and it only provides about 40% of the daily zinc requirement, 30% of the daily iodine requirement, and almost no copper. It's also deficient in vitamin D and E and 5B vitamins.
Yeah, so that's going to affect immune system function. Obviously, we talked about udder development, so it's going to mess up the growth of the milk secretory cells. It's whole lot of flow effect.
Feed efficiency, all sorts of things. Absolutely.
Yeah, wow, fascinating. Yeah, so it makes good sense. So if we work really hard to set these guys up right from the start, and then all that money that we've invested into breeding these animals, and in New Zealand we work really hard on good or high genetic animals, and they have a massive amount of potential.
Absolutely.
Like it always amazes me how much our cows can actually produce on a pasture-based system.
Right.
So
But imagine how much more they could produce if we put a little bit more emphasis on establishing that lifetime potential from the beginning.
Yeah, 100%. That's awesome. Hey, I've got a whole lot of other areas I'd love to get into, but we're pretty much out of time, and I'm really sorry. But I'd love to have you on again, and we might have to do it via the internet. But,
You just tell me when. You know, the time difference between the U.S. and New Zealand actually isn't that bad.
No, it's not too bad. As long as I get up early, I can catch you in the afternoon, which is ideal. So I'll definitely be hitting you up for that. But I can't wait to talk to you about first lactation heifers and mastitis and how to transition those animals, because that is huge as well. So so we'll park that for another day. But yeah, thanks so much for your time, mate. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and for you to be so bright and to be able to present this so well, I really appreciate it. This is your third day of back-to-back 2 or 3 presentations a day.
We're hanging in there.
Wow, and you flew into New Zealand, 4 days ago?
Monday.
Welcome to New Zealand for the 6th time, but I hope you have a great trip, mate, and thanks again for your time.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
So, cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks for jumping on, and I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And we'll keep you posted on the next one. And have fun. Catch you later.